Kale had never considered himself particularly lucky, which made the first letter all the more curious. It appeared in the middle of the night, as most strange things did, nestled inside the hum of the orbital station's recycling chute. At first, he assumed it was a prank, some overzealous junior officer testing a new encryption algorithm, or perhaps a maintenance droid with a malfunctioning sense of irony. But the handwriting struck him as meticulous, elegant, and far too deliberate to be random. He read it under the pale light of the holo lamp, watching the faint shimmer of stars beyond the reinforced window panels. Do you ever notice how gravity fluctuates in Sector 7? Makes you think someone up there is having fun with the laws of physics. It began, a casual remark with a wry undertone, followed by a line about the futility of cleaning the orbital corridors when microdust always returned. Kale chuckled aloud, startling his sleeping companion, a round-eyed service droid named Pib, who emitted a polite but clearly offended beep. Pib had a habit of taking everything personally. "I'm offended by your laughter," it announced. Or at least that was the closest approximation. Of indignation a droid, with only 3 expressive lights, could convey. For the next week, Kyle waited, almost expectantly, for another letter. When it arrived, the notes had evolved. This one contained a clever observation about the cafeteria's replicated food, noting, with sharp wit, that the beef loaf was suspiciously reminiscent of something unidentifiable on planet Azura 4, and a tiny sketch of a stick figure in a spacesuit, tumbling through zero gravity with exaggerated panic. Kyle laughed, nearly spilling his nutrient gel, and Pib twitched in a mix of confusion and exasperation. Curiosity tugged at Kyle. Who would send these? The letters hinted at knowledge of orbital patrol schedules, minor shifts in supply logistics, and even upcoming policy discussions within the Central Council, all details far beyond the reach of ordinary personnel. Yet the tone was playful, almost mischievous, punctuated with dry humor and subtle jabs at bureaucracy. The more he read, the more Kyle realized he wasn't dealing with a simple prankster. Whoever this was, they were clever, aware, and had a penchant for sardonic commentary. The station itself seemed to conspire with him. Gravity anomalies on level 7 made him stumble over a floor panel, only to land in a conveniently placed pile of cleaning mats. Lights flickered in precisely the moment he considered giving up the search for the letter writer, as if the universe, or whoever controlled it, was nudging him onward. Kyle often whispered to Pib that the station had developed a sense of humor, which Pib found unacceptable. Stations do not develop senses, it insisted, but Kyle ignored the protest, convinced otherwise. By the 3rd week, the letters became more intricate. One contained a miniature puzzle, a coded map of the Hawking space, with a note that read, "For emergencies only, or if you're really bored." Kyle spent an hour laughing at the absurdity of being instructed to locate Docking Bay 12 via a series of tiny arrows, only to find a maintenance bot whirring around aimlessly in the space, confused by its own internal logic. It was ridiculous, and yet it worked. It also gave Kyle the strange, almost giddy sense that he was participating in a game of interstellar hide-and-seek. He began noticing subtle patterns. Letters appeared during the quietest hours, often when the station's surveillance drones were in a recharge cycle, suggesting the author was meticulous and strategic. And though the writing contained playful sarcasm, it revealed a mind deeply attentive to the station's rhythms, aware of human, and possibly alien, behavior, and capable of anticipating responses with uncanny precision. Kyle's speculation ranged wildly. A rogue diplomat? An undercover intelligence officer with too much free time? A hyper-intelligent droid with a taste for satire? The humor in the letters often masked the skill behind them. One evening, a note described the ineptitude of the station's fire suppression systems. If the sprinklers ever decide to deploy, you might want to wear an extra layer of socks. I hear they're enthusiastic. Kale could barely contain a laugh, imagining the chaos if the sprinklers went off mid-negotiation with a visiting delegation from Cythera 3. He had to resist reading the letter aloud to avoid waking the entire corridor with his guffaws. Peeb, naturally, felt slighted again. Laughter is offensive, it declared. Kyle ignored the protest. Kyle tried to anticipate the author's next move. Each letter was a small puzzle, a challenge wrapped in humor, requiring careful observation and creative thinking. He sometimes left subtle replies, tiny notes in ventilation shafts, encrypted messages hidden in maintenance logs, but these never received direct acknowledgement. Still, he sensed that the letters had created a silent dialogue, a playful tug-of-war between curiosity and revelation. It was absurd, thrilling, and faintly terrifying in a way that made him stay awake longer than he should. Then came the letter that changed everything. It was delivered with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, slipping through a small maintenance slot near his quarters. Its content was unlike previous messages. A detailed reflection on a political meeting Kyle had attended, precise enough to reveal intimate knowledge of discussions, yet interspersed with teasing jokes about his coffee preferences, and a doodle of him wearing a ridiculous space helmet with antennae that curled like cat's ears. The absurdity made Kale laugh until he could barely read the lines, but beneath the humor lay undeniable intelligence, observation, and subtle persuasion. Whoever wrote this could influence events without ever being seen. Kyle sat back, staring at the starlit expanse beyond the station window. The author was clever, witty, and unassuming, a combination that made them dangerous in the most delightful way. He realized that the letters were more than correspondence. They were a bridge, a game, and a challenge all at once. He chuckled at the thought of someone sneaking around the station, long ears brushing silken hair, delivering insights and jabs in equal measure, unnoticed, yet profoundly impactful. A secret smile tugged in at the corner of his lips. Whoever this was, Kale thought, they were rewriting the rules of engagement on this station, one playful letter at a time, and he couldn't wait to see the next move. Kyle had begun to notice patterns, subtle threads, connecting each letter like constellations in the night sky. He could not pinpoint the author, but he could sense the intelligence behind each line, a mind that played with ideas as effortlessly as a musician with notes. leaving hints and jokes scattered like breadcrumbs. One night, as he tried to decode a particularly convoluted reference to a misfiring ion conduit in the central hub, he realized that the author was not just knowledgeable about the station's inner workings. They had intimate familiarity with the palace quarters and the court itself. The letters spoke in the voice of someone who had observed from the shadows for a long time, someone underestimated, unnoticed, yet acutely aware of the dynamics around them. It started innocently enough with a reference to the station's ornamental gardens. The hydroponic roses are thriving, though they will still refuse to bloom before the morning council arrives. I suspect a deliberate defiance of protocol, one letter read, signed with a tiny doodle of a rose wearing a monocle. Kale laughed aloud, almost spilling his nutrient gel again, and Pib glared at him with its 3 blinking lights. Humor detected. Offensive, it muttered. Kale ignored it, the absurdity of being chastised by a droid adding to the charm of his nightly discoveries. Then came the breakthrough. A sketch of a figure standing behind a balcony, long ears clearly drawn in delicate strokes, peeking cautiously over a railing. The note accompanying it read, "Sometimes it's better to observe than to speak, though I do enjoy a good conversation when the stars are aligned." Kyle froze. The handwriting was elegant, refined, and unmistakably deliberate. He stared at the sketch, trying to reconcile the figure with the little information he had gathered from the letters. Long ears, subtle grace, a reserved demeanor that hid a keen intellect. His mind whirred through possibilities. An overlooked ambassador? A court librarian? No, this presence seemed to belong closer to the center of power. Someone who could watch the inner workings of the station and yet remain unseen. Kyle found himself chuckling at the absurdity of it all, imagining a princess tiptoeing through hallways, dodging surveillance drones while scribbling letters by the dim glow of hololamps. He pictured her slipping past the gravity sensors, hair brushing long ears, barely audible footsteps on polished floors. The notion was ridiculous, almost laughable, yet something about it seemed believable in the playful, meticulous logic of the letters. One note even teased him directly. "If you think you've spotted me, you are likely looking at a maintenance hologram, or a very sneaky dust mote." Curiosity soon turned into quiet admiration. The letters revealed subtle insights into court politics and interstellar relations, with humorous commentary layered on top. Kyle read one while sipping his artificially synthesized tea. The council debated regulations for zero-gravity farming again. I suggest offering them a tray of floating pastries. Perhaps it will make the discussion more palatable. He laughed aloud, imagining the dignitaries chasing croissants as they floated by, and Pib's lights flickered in mock indignation. "Professional conduct compromised," it announced. Kyle ignored it, knowing full well the absurdity of such a remark was exactly the point. Night after night, the letters became increasingly clever. The author would reference obscure events, like the time a gravity stabilizer malfunction sent the chief engineer tumbling into a cargo bay, filled with anti-grav crates, but always with humor and subtle teaching. K.L. began to notice the personality behind the words. Reserved, yet observant, cautious, yet daring, quiet, but capable of reshaping events with a single, carefully placed hint. Each joke, each doodle, each casual observation was calculated to entertain and inform simultaneously. He could almost hear the author's laughter beneath the inked words, a soft, knowing chuckle that accompanied every subtle revelation. The station itself seemed to respond. Doors that had been stuck for weeks would open at the precise moment Kyle approached. Lights would flicker in a seemingly intentional pattern. And Pib, despite its objections, found itself tangled in small inconveniences, designed to distract Kale just long enough to observe the humor in each scenario. Kale was both sour and amused. "This is like being part of a cosmic sitcom," he muttered one evening, ducking a holographic security sweep that beeped with comic timing. The pivotal moment came when a letter described an intimate detail of a council debate Kale had attended, including offhand remarks he thought were private, yet presented with humor. The diplomat from Juno 7 did not notice the coffee spill, which is fortunate because spilled caffeine is more politically destabilizing than a surprise fleet mobilization. Kyle laughed so hard he nearly fell out of his chair. Whoever had written this had not only observed events in the palace, but had interpreted them with an intelligence and wit that made even the most mundane details fascinating. Then, in a moment of daring audacity, the author hinted at their identity. Some things are easier to say in the quiet of the night, where ears are long and eyes curious, and no one expects the shyest person to wield the sharpest mind. Kyle's pulse quickened. The description, the long ears, the quiet presence, the underestimated influence began to coalesce into a startling revelation. The shy princess, long overlooked in the court's hustle and bustle, was the architect of these nightly letters. The very person everyone assumed inconsequential was, in fact, quietly orchestrating insights, nudging him toward understanding, and influencing events with subtle intelligence. Kea laughed again, imagining the princess hiding behind massive curtains, ears twitching with each step, smiling at the effect of her words across the station. The humor in the letters, once merely playful, now became a signature of her brilliance. Each joke, each sardonic observation, was a demonstration of intelligence masquerading as levity. Even the most serious political advice was delivered with a wink, a doodle, or a sly pun. Kyle realized that this was no ordinary correspondence. It was mentorship, mischief, and revelation rolled into one, delivered by someone who could command attention without ever stepping into the spotlight. By the end of the week, Kyle had gathered enough to know the truth, but too much to feel any panic. Instead, he was exhilarated, amused, and oddly honored. The shy princess, long underestimated, had reached across space and secrecy to share her insight, humor, and intelligence in ways that no one else could predict. Kyle carefully placed the latest letter into a secure drawer, the doodle of a tiny figure bowing with long ears, peeking from beneath its hair, staring up at him. He whispered to Pib, "It seems we've been schooled by royalty." and we didn't even see it coming. Pib blinked. Learning is offensive, it replied. Kyle grinned. Yes, but also inevitable. And in the quiet hum of the orbital station, under the pale light of distant stars, Kyle realized he had stumbled into a game, a secret dialogue, and an unlikely friendship that would ripple far beyond the narrow corridors of the station, one carefully crafted, humor-laden letter at a time. Kyle awoke to the gentle hum of the orbital station, the pale light of distant stars glinting off the reinforced windows. Something in the air felt different. He reached for the stack of letters he had carefully preserved, each one a bridge to the unseen author, whose wit, intelligence, and subtle audacity had upended his understanding of the station, the court, and even himself. The final letter lay atop the pile, its envelope heavier than the others, as if the weight of revelation had been folded into its delicate paper. Pib, the ever-vigilant service droid, rolled over with its usual indignant blink, lights flickering, as if attempting to communicate moral judgment. You are about to read dangerous material. I advise caution. Kyle snorted. Caution be damned. It's been weeks. I deserve to know. The letter began with its usual humor, a wry observation about the station's coffee replicator misfiring yet again, producing a dark, viscous liquid that could be used as shipboard sealant in emergencies. Kyle laughed aloud, imagining the council members sipping this dubious brew while debating interstellar tariffs. But as he read further, the words grew pointed, precise, and unexpectedly candid. The princess spoke not just in jokes, but in reflection, revealing her thoughts about the station, the Empire, and the subtle consequences of inaction. She wrote about patience as a weapon, humor as a tool, and observation as a form of influence. Each line bore the signature of someone who had lived quietly, measured carefully, and yet understood the weight of small actions in shaping events. The letters had already changed Kyle. He noticed how he thought differently, weighing subtleties in negotiations, anticipating moves that would have previously blindsided him, and appreciating the power of understated influence. The letters had trained him, with humor as both bait and lens, to see beyond what was immediately obvious. He could now read a room, or a room-sized station, in ways that were both precise and playful, and he found he enjoyed the game. A particularly clever note had joked about the council's inability to manage their own schedules. Perhaps they need a zero-gravity calendar, one floating date for each week, chasing them until deadlines are met. Kyle had laughed at the absurdity, yet the next meeting ran smoother than he would have predicted, thanks to subtle cues and nudges from the princess that had guided him unnoticed. It was during a routine corridor inspection that he finally glimpsed her, not by accident, but as part of the choreography the letters had laid out. She was a quiet presence, almost ethereal, her long ears brushing back from her silvery hair, eyes sparkling with both mischief and intelligence. She did not run or hide. She merely inclined her head, a small smile tugging at her lips, acknowledging the game's culmination. Kyle felt a mixture of awe and relief. The shy princess he had underestimated was a master of influence, a tactician disguised in modesty, and a friend in a galaxy that often prized brashness over subtlety. The station itself seemed to respond to their shared understanding. Gravity shifts that once caused him to stumble now felt orchestrated, an almost playful choreography between observer and observed. Even Pib appeared calmer, its lights blinking in less judgmental patterns, as though recognizing that the danger had passed, or that it had been part of the joke all along. Kyle grinned, thinking of the first letter, the initial puzzle, the doodles, and the jokes that had made him laugh and think in equal measure. The journey from curiosity to revelation had been a gentle one, punctuated with absurdity, delight, and discovery. The ripple effects were already evident. Through her subtle guidance, Kale had begun to anticipate the moves of rival systems, prevent diplomatic mishaps, and expose minor corruption, all without drawing attention to himself or the princess. A small joke about a misbehaving transport drone led to the discovery of faulty navigation protocols. A doodle of a cat-like alien atop a council desk prompted him to address overlooked safety measures. Each letter had been a seed, and now those seeds bore fruit across the station and beyond. The princess had shaped events from the shadows, and Kyle had learned to recognize, respect, and act upon subtle influence. As they walked together along the observation deck, Kyle reflected on the journey. Humor, he realized, was not merely entertainment. It was a lens through which intelligence and courage could be measured. The shy princess, whose quiet demeanor had concealed her sharp mind, had taught him that the most understated individuals could wield profound influence if only one paid attention. They spoke in jokes and shared anecdotes, trading subtle jabs about station logistics and misbehaving droids. Yet beneath the levity lay trust, understanding, and a partnership that transcended rank, species, and expectation. The final letter, now folded neatly in Kael's hand, had accomplished its purpose. It revealed, in its clever, teasing, and insightful way, the truth about who could wield power quietly, the importance of observation, and the beauty of influence, unassuming yet precise. Kyle knew he had changed, not just in skill or awareness, but in perspective. He had learned to value subtlety, humor, and the courage hidden in restraint. The galaxy was vast, chaotic, and often absurd. Yet in the quiet correspondence of a shy princess, he had found clarity, delight, and purpose. He handed the folded letter back to the princess with a bow exaggerated enough to elicit a laugh from her long ears twitching in amusement. "You've been extraordinarily cunning," he said, smiling. "And ridiculous," she replied, a glimmer of pride dancing in her eyes. Kyle laughed, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. The letters had ended, but their effect would endure. The galaxy continued to hum and shimmer around them, a stage for subtle influence and clever humor. and Kyle felt ready to foot, armed with insight, wit, and the memory of a game well played. Pib beeped softly, almost respectfully, as if to acknowledge that a cosmic lesson had been learned. Kyle nodded toward the droid. Yes, even you can learn from this, he said, and for the first time, the lights blinked in what seemed like agreement rather than indignation. The night sky stretched beyond the observation deck, infinite and full of possibilities. Kyle realized that the shy princess, with her long ears, quiet wisdom, and playful intelligence, had done more than teach him a lesson in politics or diplomacy. She had taught him how to see, how to think, and how to laugh in the face of the galaxy's absurdities. And that, he knew, was a lesson worth 1,000 letters.